She was standing under an olive tree with other international volunteers. So she didn't look Palestinian. She's obviously from Turkey. And given that there was only one bullet fired in that direction from such a far distance that hit her in the head, I mean, it kind of just speaks for itself that this was not a random shot. It was not a ricochet. This was an intentional shot fired at these international volunteers. And it unfortunately happened to hit her.
1 year ago today, Turkish-American peace activist Aysenur Ezgi Eygi was shot dead by an Israeli sniper in the occupied West Bank. She was just 26 years old. Aishnur had traveled to the occupied West Bank with other international volunteers to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. On September 6, 2024, they joined a peaceful protest against an illegal settler outpost. When Israeli forces moved in to break up the protest, Aishnur and the others stepped back. They were standing yards away in an olive grove when an Israeli sniper shot her in the head. The Israeli military later claimed her death was indirect and unintentional, a sentiment also echoed by then U.S. President Joe Biden. Despite international outrage, the State Department refused to investigate. But that very same day she was killed, Washington charged Hamas leaders over the death of an American Israeli hostage in Gaza. That contrast highlights Washington's unwavering support for Tel Aviv, backed by billions in annual military aid and decades of shielding it from accountability, even when American citizens are killed. In this episode, I sit down with Aishnur's husband, Hamid Ali. Together we talk about who Aishnur was, what she stood for, and how Israel got away with murdering her.
My name is Hamid Ali. I am 30 years old. I met Aishnur in 2020. We were married in 2021. So we would have been married 4 years, last month.
So for people who are hearing her name for the first time, how would you describe Aishnur as a person and as a wife?
I think something I've been wanting to emphasize more, especially if people are hearing, how she died, is that she was just like a normal 26-year-old woman. There was things that I felt were exceptional about her, but there was also a lot that was normal about her and average. She wasn't this superhuman figure, hero kind of person that I think sometimes she tends to become. And I just want to honor the realness of her. And that being said, I mean, she was really silly. She was very playful. I think she was very curious about many, many things. She was very connected to her Turkish identity and her family there. I could go on forever, but, she was silly at home. She loved playing with our cat. She was a really good friend.
I love that you talked about her outside of her activism, which is something that she's now known for.
Right.
I mean, she was active on so many fronts: Black Lives Matter, Myanmar, and of course, Palestine. What drove her to dedicate so much of her young life to activism and standing up for people?
I think it was how she grew up. I mean, she grew up in America, but also very aware of the disparity of wealth between people in America even. So I think being able to relate to folks that were marginalized or underrepresented, herself being an immigrant, a child of immigrants, was something that I believe gave her this empathy or a way to easily identify and relate to other communities that had faced similar struggles.
One of the defining chapters of her activism is when she decided to go to the occupied West Bank. I mean, many of us that are seeing what's happening in Palestine are very affected by the images and the videos and the stories coming out of Gaza specifically. But Aishnur decided to actually do something and go there. Why did she choose to travel to the occupied West Bank? What was she hoping to achieve in this visit?
She felt this in her heart, in her being, that this was wrong. She had already done so much in her way, to try and do what she could to correct it. So, whether it was organizing a art market fundraiser in our neighborhood, or whether it was helping with the student protests on the university campus, she still felt like I think there's something else I can do. And so she decided to go to the West Bank for that reason. And this was the case in all aspects of her life, where if she believed something or she felt something, she either needed to say it or do something about it. And I think the other reason she wanted to go was to understand these people and this culture firsthand that she had been advocating for. I mean, she had Palestinian friends here. She had read up on the subject, of course, but it's different when you're in the place and you're speaking to the people and you're making connections. And, she wanted to come back and study anthropology, focusing on the Middle East. And then from there, she just started making plans. I mean, she wanted to go to Turkey. She spent a month in Turkey before traveling to the West Bank, visited all of her family, which, looking back is like such a blessing for them and for her. And then went to Jordan, and then from Jordan crossed into the West Bank.
What was the day-to-day life like for her in the occupied West Bank? I mean, did she speak to you about the circumstances they were under, what kind of work they were trying to do on the ground?
Yeah, and what's unfortunate is that she wasn't there for very long. Um, she got there 4 days before she was killed. She had just gotten settled and kind of gotten her bearings before she went to this protest and was killed. So, I mean, from what I understood and from what I can read from a couple of things she wrote to me, was that it was super impactful because this was a place that had been, you know, talked about and referenced and for so long for her. And being able to be in Jerusalem and go to the Dome of the Rock or um, see all these places that have been in pictures or had been in videos and like walk around was really powerful for her. She also, witnessed the occupation firsthand, even in those short 3, 4 days. I remember her talking about the jarring kind of nature of the Israeli forces being on the streets and like the blatant kind of obvious double standard and segregation and apartheid that was there, even in Jerusalem. I remember she had like a journal entry that I found later about as they were entering or driving to Jerusalem from the border, they were on a bus or something, and then the bus got stopped and an Israeli soldier came on and like started checking everyone's papers and her friend that was with her was really like, oh my God, how can this happen? But she was kind of unfazed by it. She understood that there's inherent risk in traveling to somewhere that's occupied, especially for supporting those being occupied. But there was no fear of not coming back home. There was no expectation of being martyred or becoming a martyr. Like that's not something she intended. That's not something she chose. That's not something she really wanted, of course.
She went to the occupied West Bank to stand in solidarity with Palestinians and oppose the violence that they are facing. Yet she herself became a victim of that violence. So, what information have you been able to piece together about the events that unfolded that day? And to now, has more information surfaced?
Yeah, the information I have is based on eyewitness accounts, um, because there hasn't been any kind of communication or any kind of official results of any credible investigation, either by the Israelis, which we wouldn't find credible to begin with, but even their investigation hasn't finished, or we haven't been told about it. It was Friday. There was this weekly protest in Beta in the West Bank against an illegal Israeli settlement of that village. So every week, every Friday, they'll pray Jummah at this hilltop under these trees, and then they'll begin this demonstration just to kind of say, hey, we don't want this illegal settlement that's going to displace us. And there's a road that the people will stand on and march. I'm not exactly sure of the specifics of the demonstration, but I know it was peaceful. It started out peaceful at least. And then when things started to escalate, and then by that I mean the IDF or the Israeli military started to uh, push these protesters back more aggressively with tear gas, with other kind of rubber bullets, that kind of thing. And that's when Aishnur, because it was her first protest, that's when she kind of quickly retreated to the back for her own safety, but also to be able to document, like, because that's what she was there for. She was there to document and be this protective presence as an international American person. She went back to the Solid Grove, and that was kind of like the retreating point for international volunteers. Again, she was with another volunteer, and they stood there under the olive tree. And then after about 20 minutes of things kind of dying down, there was 20 minutes of calm. There was no agitation from the protesters. There was no agitation from the military. A couple shots were fired, live ammunition. One hit a Palestinian man, and then the other one hit Aishnur. And then from there, they went to the hospital, and unfortunately, she passed away.
The Israeli government said it was unintentional. How did you react when you first heard that?
This is their playbook, right? So it wasn't surprising. It was extremely frustrating and extremely infuriating, but at the same time, it was like, yeah, this is what they do. This is what they say. This is copy paste. We've become close to the Corey family because Rachel Corey was also from Washington State, which is where we're from and where Aishnur grew up.
Hamid references Rachel Corey, a 23-year-old American activist who had been protesting the demolition of Palestinian homes in Rafah during the Second Intifada. During the protest, Corey was killed when an Israeli military bulldozer ran over her. Corey was a member of the International Solidarity Movement, a Palestinian-led group of international volunteers who use nonviolent protests to oppose Israel's occupation. That same group that Aishnur traveled with to the occupied West Bank. In Corey's case too, the Israeli army claimed her death was an accident and cleared its soldiers of wrongdoing.
Anytime, whether they're bombing a hospital or whether they're, killing reporters, it's always the same. It started off with, oh, she was, in Aishnur's case, they accused her of throwing rocks, they accused her of agitating, and then it came out that, oh, she was actually 200 yards away under a tree just minding her own business. Then they're like, oh, we were actually shooting at someone else. And then, oh, it was unintentional. This is expected, doesn't make it any less infuriating.
Despite the fact that she was a U.S. citizen, how do you think the U.S.'s response to this situation played out? How would you evaluate the actions that they took or the lack of action?
Early on, when President Biden was questioned about it, he kind of casually reinforced this uninvestigated narrative that the Israeli military was pushing, that it was an accidental ricochet, which was I don't know where they got that from either.
What's your reaction, sir, to the killing of the Israeli admission that they probably killed the Turkish activist in the West Bank?
Finding more detail, apparently it was an accident, ricocheted off the ground and just got hit by accident, but I'm working that out now.
And the fact that he so casually endorsed it and repeated it without even looking into it, especially because she was an American citizen, felt more insulting, actually, and irresponsible. And then when we went to Washington, D.C., and we sat down with the Secretary of State, then Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and kind of asked him these questions too, how can you not do anything? What are the options? It was kind of just shoulder shrugging, yeah, we can't really do anything about it, sorry. And they used the polite words and they tried to make it sound in the political speak that is used to make you feel like they're doing something but not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
1 year later, we're asking for the same thing. Nothing more has been released. No more, new information has been shared. There's no indication of any investigation from anywhere. And what's really sad is that this is the case for every other American that's been killed, let alone Palestinians that have been killed. There have been 5 or 6 Americans that have been killed since October 7th, including Aishnur. And it's the same case for every one of them, and it's just extremely frustrating.
Since 2022, 9 Americans, including Aysenur Ezgi Eygi, have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers.
20-year-old Seyfullah Musalat was beaten to death in
Jacob Flickinger had dual U.S.-Canadian citizenship.
Tawfiq Abdel Jabbar was shot and killed by Israeli
Omar
authorities.
Assad, who died after soldiers detained him at a West Bank.
2 more kids was killed here. One of them is American citizen.
While the context differs case by case, the U.S. response and the lack of accountability form a common thread. After each killing, Washington orders Tel Aviv to investigate, and Israel's investigations often clear its forces or label incidents as accidents. Despite global outrage, justice for these victims remains unfulfilled.
On October 7th, tragically, there were Americans who were killed, Israeli Americans. And, the Attorney General of the United States said, when an American is killed, we always investigate. And they investigated, and they were able to, bring cases against those that had killed these Americans. It's something we've pointed out like a number of times to the Department of Justice and to publicly, that there's this very definitive statement being said. And what's the difference now between these two cases? Like, Aishnur being killed very clearly, even less ambiguously, even more unjustly, if not more than about the same level of injustice has occurred there too. So what is the reason for you not investigating this or not implementing this kind of strong statement that you just said? And I think that's how Israel is able to get away with this, is that the impunity that they're given, it was a conscious decision by that soldier to fire that bullet, and the commander who gave the order, and the general kind of atmosphere or ability for the Israeli military to do whatever they want is reinforced by decades now of impunity by those that support them the strongest, so the U.S. in particular. They're not going to do anything about it, so we can do whatever we want.
So you guys are calling for an independent U.S.-led investigation. How are you in that process?
Yeah, that's kind of our focus now, not because we're unsure about what happened or we want answers of how she was killed. I think we all know, and we kind of are able to make our own conclusions about that. But I think it's still important to have it like formally done, and that's why we push for an investigation, because it unlocks the next step which is accountability. For now, we know who did it, and we have the proof for it. Now we can get some accountability for that, which is the ultimate goal. Since justice is unlikely, we can hope for accountability instead. We have done things basically to build public pressure to try and influence and use that as leverage, because as individuals and citizens, we're not billionaires, so we don't have a lot of leverage other than generating public pressure. So everything we've done, we have passed, with the help of many others, a state resolution in the state of Washington, just recognizing Aysenur and what happened to her. And we've done, things like this, media. We've spoken in DC. We're planning to go again in the middle of September after I get back from Turkey. And this is all in a way to keep this public pressure up, keep this relevant, in order to pressure our government to do the right thing.
How do you see her death connected to the larger Palestinian struggle for justice and for freedom?
Her being there is the connection to the larger struggle. Like the fact that she was in the West Bank doing this, why was she there in the first place? Because there's this ongoing issue in the sense of Aishnur's story, that it doesn't end there. Like it doesn't end when she was killed. Like it's part of this larger pattern and context of brutal oppression in the West Bank as well, especially now. I was asking her before she left, and I was pulling out every trick in the book to maybe tell her to choose a different time to go. But I was like, what do you think you're gonna you're not gonna stop settler violence what are you hoping to achieve by doing this? And then I said, maybe if you're killed and are this martyr, you can have a big impact with this in the wake of your death. or as a way to like point out this like glaring injustice. And I remember having the conversation, and she was like, "Yeah, but that doesn't matter. Like I don't have to, you don't have to become a martyr to have an impact. You can still do an individual act, and they just add on top of each other. And then one day there'll be a straw that breaks the camel's back, basically. And that's what keeps me going, is her telling me that."
What do you think she would have hoped the world would take away from her life and, her sacrifice, essentially?
I think firstly, she would want people to remember that this is the daily life of Palestinians, like what our family is going through, and the violence that she faced is something that they face every single day. And it was an exceptional case for her. Like it wasn't. It got a lot of attention in America, maybe, or elsewhere, because she wasn't Palestinian, because she was there by choice. Craig Corey said something, Rachel Corey's dad, that when people ask, why was she there? Wasn't she so brave? His response is, why weren't we all there? Like it wasn't, this isn't something that we all can't, are exempt from, or this is not something that we can't do as well. You don't have to be this super activist. You don't have to be a lifelong, advocate for justice. You don't have to have a law degree. You don't have to have all these qualifications. You just have to try, which is what she did. Even in the littlest of ways, I think if you can't do anything about it, speak out about it. If you can't speak out about it, think about it, write about it. And if you can't do that, like at least in your heart, just feel something, and don't close yourself off from this, because that's another thing that these power structures rely on, is that you ignore it and, close off your heart to it, because it is difficult and it's not easy to do that. It's painful and it does disrupt your life, but that's the least that we can do to ensure that, and again, these things add up, because one day it'll be too much for you, and then you'll have to say something about it. That won't be enough. You have to do something about it. And these little actions will add up. And I think that's what I hope her legacy is that.
Thank you so much for joining me today and for everything that you shared.
Thank you so much again for doing this and talking about her and letting me talk about her.
Aishnur Ezgi Eygi's story is a stark reminder of courage and injustice. She traveled to the occupied West Bank to stand in solidarity with Palestinians, to witness the Israeli occupation firsthand, and to act on her convictions. But her death is a reflection of a system where justice is selectively applied, where governments and militaries can act with immunity, and where ordinary people's lives are treated as expendable. Yet even in this climate of injustice, Aishnur's life offers a lesson. It's not just the grand acts of heroism that matter, but the consistent choice to act, to witness, and to refuse to stay silent. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ezgi Topar, and this was In the Newsroom. This was a TRT podcast production. This episode for In the Newsroom was produced by me, Ezgi Topar, and was edited by Nasrullah Yilmaz. Executive producer Nasra Umar Buhana. Our production team also includes Khalid Selim, Mujtaba Shamil Ölmaz, and Afsal Ahmed. Thanks for listening.